Hi, it's Andrew Paul Cronin. Thank you for listening to the Q&A with A.P.C. Over the past couple of years, I've talked to artists, a poet, a doctor, my two moms, an orchestra conductor, a ghost hunter, a race car driver, a professional dancer, and many, many more. If you like these stories, if you like the guests, if you like the questions, if you like the show, please consider supporting it. Go to qaapc.com/donate. Thanks.
But I was always sort of curious about Cronin. I thought he was some sort of wizard. I thought he was older than he was. I thought a lot of things, and then he comes, he's like, he's just this guy. But he does the full spectrum. He lives down the street. So here's Cronin.
This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you're listening to the Q&A with A.P.C., the show that features conversations with artists, cultural figures, policymakers, performers, and other innovators living in Virginia. Episode 42, Brad McMurran and Sean Devereux. My guests are two of the founding members of the improv and sketch comedy troupe, The Pushers. Brad McMurran is the founder, co-head writer, and artistic director of the Push Comedy Theater. Sean Devereux is an original member of The Pushers and has been performing and writing comedy for nearly 15 years. The Pushers are one of Virginia's premier sketch and improv comedy groups. Since 2005, they have captivated audiences in comedy clubs and festivals up and down the East Coast. In New York City, they have performed at the People's Improv Theater, the Upright Citizens Brigade, and at the Crane Theater in New York's East Village. Offstage, beginning in 2010, McMurran and Devereux started teaching improv classes to people of all ages and from all walks of life. Doctors, lawyers, college students, corporations, nearly everyone from middle schoolers to senior citizens. In 2012, they launched the Norfolk Comedy Festival. And in 2013, they received national attention when their off-Broadway musical, Cuff Me, the unauthorized 50 Shades of Grey musical parody, debuted in New York City. It ran for over a year in both New York and Chicago, and later toured the country. In 2014, they opened their own theater, the Push Comedy Theater, located in the Arts District in downtown Norfolk, Virginia. For more information on the Pushers and how you can take a class or attend a performance, visit pushcomedytheater.com. Brad McMurran, Sean Devereux, thanks so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Are there parts to improv comedy that serve people well in the real world, like in their jobs, in their relationships, at the checkout counter at the grocery store?
Yes, this is Brad, and 100%. We found with improv comedy that we're actually teaching corporate workshops now. So what you find is it helps, in my opinion, it helps most with being comfortable in awkward situations, but also with communications. I mean, the thing that you get out of improv comedy is that the basis of it is make your partner look good and yes and. And yes and is this kind of technique that you take whatever the other person's energy is and you always agree to it and add to it is really where you're coming from. You don't want to negate them. So to answer your question, yeah, it really helps. I teach teenagers and we teach preteens and we teach lawyers, doctors, everything you can think of. And what's kind of lovely about when it comes back is it makes life a little more positive.
Do you try it in the checkout line? I hear interviews with actors who, starting out, like worked at Burger King drive-thru and they would like practice different things. Do you try that?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I used to work at Barnes & Noble a long time ago, and I would use it there. And you use it for comedy mainly, or to get rapport with somebody. But to be honest with you, I get in trouble too, yeah.
Yeah, I would say when we were studying up in New York, our teacher challenged us to yes and everyone we met for a week because people are so often used to just hearing no, but just saying yes to people, you become one of the most popular people around.
We got very lucky. We were up there when they were kind of in a boom at Upright Citizens Brigade.
Sure.
And teachers would tell us, try this, and you would do it, and you know somebody would call you and say, hey, been having a kind of a bad day. Do you want to go out? And you're like, yes, and I'll buy the beer. And you end up almost, you got to be careful because you could end up on drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's talk about it. It's one of the fundamental tenets of improv. It's the idea of agreeing and seeing what happens next. Talk about this phrase, yes and. I feel like I've heard about it much more in the past 5 years than I ever have before.
Yeah, it's almost, I would say in the past few years, become kind of almost like a philosophy, I would say. It's gotten a lot of traction. Plus, I mean, improv has become so huge, but yeah, I think using it in everyday life with the people you meet, obviously it works really well in creative situations. We taught actually a workshop at Channel 13 for our salespeople. I use it in the marketing department when you have a bunch of people trying to contribute ideas. Everybody wants their idea to be heard. So by kind of slowing down and listening to what the other person has to say, agreeing with it, and then adding your idea so you're all kind of contributing to this kind of melting pot of ideas really works out well.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think that's kind of insane is I teach this every day of my life. Human beings are combative. So like every time we do a scene, and it doesn't matter when it's the first day, they want to go up there and create conflict. This improvisation form doesn't work well with conflict. We're writers, so we know what conflict is because you have to write it as well as you would as an English teacher, is to overcome that in literature or whatever it is you read in a story and it's got the problem that you overcome.
Sure.
This form doesn't work well with that, but what's kind of amazing about it is we'll tell them that. It's like, don't be combative and don't negate. Those are the two words that are very big to us. But the first day, that's all they do. And the same thing we did when we first started training. You just want to fight because I think that's our go-to. So when you retrain the brain to have to not fight, it turns into comedy, and you see everybody kind of get a more chummy with each other would be the best way I could put that.
You can be funny within yourself, but when you're working with someone else, you need certain rules to be able to create something in the moment without a script. You can't just go out there and everybody starts talking. That was a quote from Matt Besser of the Upright Citizens Brigade. What are the rules he's talking about? You need certain rules to be able to create something in the moment without a script. What are those rules?
Well, the first one is obviously yes and. You always agree to whatever your partner is saying. Another one is listen. A lot of times in improv, especially when people are starting out, they're so worried about what they're going to say next that they're not listening to what their partner is saying. Other things like don't ask questions because that's just then throwing the onus back on your partner. When you start asking questions, you're making them do all the work.
Like verbally ask questions,
Yes.
like of the person you're talking to.
Yeah,
on
instead
stage.
of saying, hey, what do you want to do today? Now you're in charge of making up the scene. You say,
Okay.
Hey, let's go to the beach.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know what kind of rating you have on the show, but I will tell you, it even has a slang to it in our world. If you're asking a lot of questions, it's called pimping your partner, where in essence what you're doing is you're putting them out to the pasture. But I think he's also talking about, if I may say, is you're still looking long form improv, and let's get it out of the way right now. Long form improvisation is training. Short form is like Whose Line Is It Anyway, where you have it more like they have the games made up for you, and you're a cop that has Tourette's. And long form, we make up the who, what, wheres. It's still important in our world, the who, what, where. And once you can get that who, what, where down, it makes you lose yourself for a minute and get into the world that you're in. Now, one place I don't agree with him, if you've got good chemistry, throw all that out the window. You get two people that really enjoy each other, it tends to work really well. Yeah.
Do people have chemistry straight away without ever having met, or is the chemistry developed over time?
Sometimes. I mean, sometimes if you see somebody that where they've got a little bit of a sexual attraction, they'll have that there. Or if they have, I've had it where you've just liked somebody, but I would say not normally. No. And the two things we can't teach when we teach improv, and I stole this from my teacher up at Upright Citizens Brigade, is we can't teach timing and we can't teach chemistry. You sort of come in with your own timing. We can help hone it, but we really can't teach. You can't teach that. That's something I think that's kind of innate. And then you have chemistry. We do a lot of warm-up games, and I just started one-on-one class actually last night. And the best thing you can do, get to know each other. And certain people, I'm sure you know this, that you just enjoy each other.
Mm-hmm. In improv, you have to learn to relinquish your own idea and build off your partner's. Now, if that's the case, how does any idea gain traction and stick? Like, how does one person's idea end up becoming the one?
I'm going to jump in on this one. All right, so this is interesting. But what you're talking about here is something that we're certainly upright trained. That's really where we trained because we didn't know we kind of knew improv from Who's the Line at that point in time. We were kind of country bumpkins down here until we went up there and learned it. What he's talking about is you do have to let go of your idea. You have to be listening to the other person, but there's something in our world that's called the weird. So if I'm talking to you, Andrew, and we're going back and forth at the beginning of a scene, kind of finding your who, what, wheres, inevitably the weird will pop up. Something weird comes out of somebody's mouth, and this is where the training comes in. How do we know it's weird? There's a few ways. A, if you listen and somebody says something off beat or off color or whatever it is, we want to hone in that. And most scenes turn into straight man, crazy man. So we want to take that weird thing that was said. The other way that you can indicate weird is the audience laughs. They're going to inevitably laugh whenever the first weird thing's said.
And you tap in, you hear that, and you move with that.
That's the idea that matters. That's called a game play. In our world, that's something I learned in 201 and we teach in 201, is that once you have a game play, if you have two trained improvisers, they're going to catch on to that game, and then they're going to heighten it and exaggerate it. And just like any good story, if somebody walked in here right now and said, I hate your podcast, and threw an egg at us, that's great. But later on in the day, when I tell this story, it's going to be a little exaggerated, where he flicked you off to or whatever it is. So we really train in game plays to where you have to be listening for the weird. So when you're saying, how does it get traction? Listening for that first weird, and that could be you or me up there that's doing that. And I don't know if you have anything to add, but that was kind of,
You want to add to that?
No.
Okay. You agree? That means you agree?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Here's a quote from Amy Poehler, quote, "You don't want to try to be funny. When people try to be funny, they kind of disassociate from what real life is sometimes. And so it's trying to stay grounded and real so that the first unusual thing in a scene is what you catch, and you explore that." Basically exactly what you just said. So I think this exact thing about staying aware of real life happened in a performance I went to just a few days ago. So there was a point at the show where two characters were having a conversation over drinks. One of them was drinking beer. And one of the characters was talking and moving his hands in such a way that if there were an actual beverage in his hands, the drink would have spilled or dripped on the floor. Now, Brad, you recognized this in a very natural way, and you scrubbed the floor a few times before we all caught on in the audience what was actually happening. And that specific movement caused one of the biggest laughs of the whole show.
Absolutely.
Of the whole
Yeah,
night.
you're talking about my good friend Ed Carden, who's a great comedian. But he's terrible at props, and we can say this right now, and he knows that. But I would say he was extra terrible that night, where I was handing him the drink, as you saw, and it kept falling. And that's called a game within a game, because that's not what the scene was about. If you remember, the scene was about, I actually remember this scene, which is surprising because we do a lot of scenes, but I do remember this one, is that he would show up at the wrong times in my life, or at all times in my life, actually. So when we were having sex, or when I was having, my mother was dying, I think at one point in time, he would come there and give me kind of strange advice. But with that one, back to what Amy Poehler said, which is our training, is that's unusual. So if I gave you a drink right now, you have a Starbucks coffee I see right over there. When you were talking to me, it was shaking everywhere. For my not to call attention to that at some point in time would be almost a party foul for improv. And kind of going back, and sorry to take over this, Sean, but going back what you said about being funny, she's absolutely right. The sort of the Bible of improv is called Truth and Comedy. And we're not writing the jokes. We do that. I mean, we come from a sketch comedy background, but not in improv. When you get out there and try to be funny, it derails the entire scene. Sorry, I know we had sort of two questions there, but that's sort of my feeling on that. I don't know what your thoughts are.
No, I agree. I think because we're making it up on the spot, when you start getting jokey joke, it stops being real. And you want the scene to be as real as possible. When that weird moment happens, it's easier to see it. Like I said, with the drink thing, if they were in like astronauts in space and goofing off and stuff like that, the drink bit wouldn't have been funny. But because they were having a weird conversation, but they were still two friends talking in a kitchen, and one guy is waving around his arms and the drink is flying everywhere, that was a real scene and a real moment.
Brad, you mentioned it a moment ago. Are there some people who are particularly good at handling props, things like taking your socks off or drinking from a glass, things like that? Like, are there some people who are just better at it than others?
Damn it, yeah. When I was in New York, and now that I teach it every day of my life, you find the natural pantomimers, and I am not that. I will tell you, it's taken me 7 years, I would say, to really where you won't see me in a scene without props, but it took work. And there are certain people, Alba Woolard, who's in our cast, phenomenal at it. The minute
Sure.
you gave that to her, her brain thinks that way, and it's good because once you're creating that fake world, you're creating setting. Back to what you're being an English teacher is setting so crucial in that. Is that if you can create setting without saying a word, by doing it physically, the world is yours. So, I mean, to answer your question, yes, there are some naturally gifted pantomimers, and you can't see me behind this microphone right now, but those people I flick off, but I also salute. I had a girl in New York that was not doing well with improvisation the first week or two, and props or pantomiming or finding an activity, however you want to look at it. The day they taught that, she was phenomenal, Andrew. It changed her whole world, and she became a great improviser after that came to play. So the answer is absolutely. And for those that can't do it, there's still hope.
And are there people who do it too much and it's distracting? Like, do you ever have to tamp it down? Is that something? Yes. Okay. Is there a difficulty or what's the balance in having people move the story forward, to move the narrative along and actually push the storyline? Like, how long do you hang on the story about their problems, their marital problems, before cutting to the divorce? Like, how do you know?
It's interesting you said that. So I'm going to let Sean come in here in a second, because what you're talking about is, to the outsider, you're thinking story. We don't want plot or story. We want behavior. So believe it or not, plot is a no-no in our world. So when you saw that, your brain thought story, which makes us very happy that you thought that. That is not what we want. What we want is behavior. Like, for instance, that scene that you were talking about, the guy showed up everywhere that I didn't want him to be. We're just thinking of scenarios to put him in. We're not thinking of anything linear. If you think of it linear, you get plotty, which is probably my weakness in improv, because I write, is that if I get plotty, it's death to the scene. Well, all I want to do is, what's your behavior? So back to that unusual thing. If you're spilling drinks every time you're around me, and let's suppose that you're always cutting me off when we talk, I want to put us in scenarios where that is heightened or exaggerated to where it's funny. I don't want to think like, what's he like tomorrow and has he changed? We don't change in improv. In improv, if you're Ebenezer Scrooge who's a jerk, we don't want to see him change at the end. We want to just see his behavior the entire time put into 15 different ways. So it's interesting you asked that question.
So you're trying to get, so let's say my thing is I spill drinks. You're trying to get as many scenes where I would be spilling a drink on stage at once?
Yeah, I would say if it's spilling drinks or you start getting maybe a little bit deeper into the behavior, I would say in that scene you were talking about, the guy was spilling his drink.
Yes.
But also completely oblivious to the fact he was spilling his drink. So if he's oblivious to spilling his drink, what other things is he oblivious to, and try to find those situations?
And in that same token, where else would that be funny? Like, if we took him right now, I'm just thinking off the cuff, take him to communion in a church. If they're giving him that drink, that's going to be hilarious. Right. That's not actually story, it's behavior. So it's interesting, and we want you to think it's story, but it's not. Yeah.
Now, should he have known, was it his mistake as someone who does improv comedy that his hands were moving too much?
We both laughed. Yes, he knows that. He also is smart enough to know if we stayed on just that, it wouldn't have been all that funny. Okay. Yeah, but that's a good eye by you.
Do you ever say yes to something in a scene that you know can or may derail the scene or break the flow of a scene? Like, what does that feel like? How do performers handle that? If you're always saying yes, do you ever say yes to something that you know may not go over? Sean, you want?
Yeah, I think it's yes. You have to yes and everything, but then also there comes a point in time, because we do want the scenes to be based in some sort of reality. So if my scene partner says, I want you to jump off a bridge, I can't say yes and to that, because then if I jump off a bridge, then it becomes a one-person improv scene, and that's not very funny. So you can yes and the reality. I can yes and the fact that I have a jerky friend who's trying to make me jump off a bridge without actually jumping off a bridge. So you can yes and the reality. You don't have to yes and the specific words.
Okay.
And to follow up on what you're saying too, you don't want to yes and out of your character. We're looking for patterns. So back to that behavior again. If I'm in a scene to where I'm just making this up on the spot, let's suppose that I'm very sexual. Okay, let's suppose that's what I am on that. And somebody says to me, "Oh, you want to be a priest and give up and become celibate." That's not going to be a yes and for me, because that doesn't fit in my behavior. Now, I'm not negating him, but I'm going to stay in the pattern of my world. So this is where you get into actual training. It's lovely, and it's something that really changed my world, and I love teaching it. But You're asking really kind of cool questions. You're asking I actually like this interview. You're asking questions that most people don't think about. Yeah. So to answer your question is, you don't want a yes and out of your character. Have we ever done it? Oh, yeah. I mean, we failed every 1,000 ways you can think of. And
negating, is that physically represented when someone walks in front of someone and sort of circles around them? Because that seems to be, at least the show that I saw, was like sort of the signal to cut and to move on.
No, that's actually called an edit.
And to answer your question on a negation would be right now, if the two of us were in an improv scene and I said to you, my God, Andrew, that sleeveless vest you have on with your chest hair hanging out is very sexy. And you said to me, no, I'm not wearing a vest. That's a negation. Does that make sense? Because now we have to now re-explain that, and it becomes exposition we don't need.
What do you do if you're in a scene that's not going well and you turn to your partner and you look at them and they're just lost and don't know where to go with it? Is there a comedic safe place that's always good and functional and safe? That might be different for different people, but is there like a place that you can kind of always rely on to take it somewhere?
Yes, the answer is to slow down. Everybody's impulse is to go faster when we screw up. I mean, God knows if I do 10 scenes, 7 of them might be good because I've been doing it a while, but there'll be 3 disasters. I mean, that's the way improv goes, or even comedy goes. We're going to have your nights. The nights I know that for me, when it's off, is when we're not listening. I know it sounds so fundamental, but we always say listen like thieves. And if you're not listening and missing what your partner's saying, and then you're not listening to me, there's something in our world called a mercy edit, and that you're on the back line, that thing you were talking about where you run in the front. I'm going to wait about 20 seconds on the back line and see if you can get it back. But if you're not, first rule of improv is make your partner look good. I'm going to edit y'all and help you out.
So when I mentioned to people about having you on the show, several people wanted to make sure that I ask you about the first time you met each other. Sean, you met Brad. Brad, you met Sean. And I guess I got the impression that it maybe was sort of a negative first impression.
Yeah, I would say...
This is Sean talking.
Yeah. I would say for the first year, maybe year and a half, we hated each other's guts. I thought he was a kind of a pompous asshole. Yeah.
You thought I was pompous?
Yeah. I thought you thought you were God's gift to comedy. I guess we had friends who were similar. We kind of ran in the same circles and had been at parties together. And yeah, I just did not like him at all. And you probably thought I was a pretty boy douchebag.
Pompous, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the right word.
Yes. Even once the pushers started, I would say for the probably first year or so, we really did not get along. That first year we started to kind of cool on each other, and like he would make me laugh despite me wanting to hate him. But yeah, I would say it was about a good year where we did not like each other.
I really didn't want him in the group. I had started the group. I didn't want him in, but there was something. We need writers, and he was a very good writer. And I was like, God, this sucks. I don't want this guy in here. And then it did have sort of a switch. Although I think a lot of people are wanting to ask you about this. Since we've become friends, some people still don't know if we are.
Can you describe what happens to you when you step on stage? Like, how do you change? Do you change?
Sean doesn't.
I would say I become an extrovert. I would say in real life I'm very introverted, kind of quiet. I would say very shy. I'm not the one initiating conversations, but on stage, I don't know. I guess it's a lack of self-consciousness maybe comes into effect. It's not that I don't have self-confidence off stage. I really do, but on stage for some reason that self-confidence gets turned up to 11.
Sean, that's something you found sort of immediately when you first started?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I'm completely comfortable making a fool out of myself in front of large groups of people.
Brad, when you step on stage, do you change? Is there something that switches?
Yes. Yeah. It's kind of wild. It's the one time it kind of makes sense. I screw up a lot in life, so I kind of made a whole mess of my life. But out there, it's the one time things kind of make sense, and I'm very tuned in and very physical. I would say it's one of those things. If you ask me, the biggest thing I do, I like to change physically up there. And oddly enough, I listen better on stage than I do in real life.
Brad, your parents were in the audience the night I attended. I would think that improv comedy business owner might be a tough career choice for parents to fully endorse, if that's not too personal of a question.
No.
Can you talk about sort of that road?
Sure. My father is a retired judge from Portsmouth. He was a circuit court judge in Portsmouth. His father was a retired circuit court judge from Portsmouth, and my brother was a lawyer. He is now over at Town Bank, and
You really broke the mold there.
yeah. And my sister's a French teacher that went and studied at the Sorbonne, and they made a huge mistake, Andrew. They like me. No, it's not what they had planned. However, they did at the table, I think, their whole life. I think it made sense to them because I would always keep them in hysterics. And I've spent a lot of their money, you know. Yeah, it was not maybe their first thing. I think the thing is they used to hate when we wrote blue material. And we keep saying that is like
Yeah, describe what that means.
dirty, kind of low-hanging fruit, not clever in a lot of ways. And when we first started, I think we were that, unfortunately. I think we were we've grown a little bit.
Kind of like sexual genitalia, that kind of...
Absolutely. I mean, in our world, it's called and fart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's terrible to say that.
Or saying the F word just
Uh-huh.
because.
Shock.
It wasn't very clever at first, and I remember my mom said to me and to Sean, because she did self-expression is not a problem for her, and she's got this southern accent, and she said, "I just don't like when y'all do that, and it's never going to pay off." Well, about what year was that? 2011, 12. We got we got hooked up to write probably the thing we're most famous for is the 50 Shades of Grey, Cuff Me, the 50 Shades of Grey musical parody that was all that. And it actually played in off-Broadway for years, so when she went up to see it with her friends, it was all that humor that actually did get us paid, and it was kind of a very funny flip.
Both of you have performed up and down the East Coast, and at one point, both of you moved to New York. Brad, you moved first. Sean moved up later, and studied at the famed Upright Citizens Brigade, which has produced such comedy heavyweights as Amy Poehler, Donald Glover, Kate McKinnon, Aziz Ansari, and many, many more. How did that experience change you? Like, what did you learn? What did you get that you didn't get before?
We say it all the time. I would say it gave us, number one, vocabulary. So we had been performing for about 3 years before Brad moved up, 2 years, and then I moved up. And I never officially moved up. I would bounce back and forth between here and New York. But it gave us vocabulary. When we start talking about like the game of a scene, we never knew what the game was, even though a lot of our scenes that we wrote and improvised had it. We just didn't know what to call it. It gave us, I think, structure in a lot of ways. I think we had all the tools that just kind of helped us organize them and refine them. And also gave us, I think, some confidence because we went up there and we actually did well. We both did well in classes. And we started doing, we kind of formed a New York version of the Pushers and started doing shows up there as well. And they were getting traction.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of went to the biggest arena in the whole United States. I mean, Chicago certainly is one as well, but it must have been, you know, a full sail kind of experience to kind of feel like you could hang.
It really was. I think we had an unfortunate mishap that kind of derailed our New York dreams, but if it wasn't for that, I think we probably would have still been doing stuff up there.
Wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask what it was. What was the derailment?
One night after a rehearsal, Brad peed on my head, and I horse collared him and cracked his head open and sent him to the hospital. It was at $18,000 in hospital bills. Yeah.
I had 13 staples.
Yeah, he didn't have insurance, so that. And I would say, people ask me to this day, I do not feel bad. I mean, the man peed on my head, thinking he was going to be funny, so I am perfectly justified in cracking his head open.
No.
How do you follow that? Yeah, that happened. He's right. Confidence. You nailed it. I love the question on that. I think us going up there off of the peeing on the head thing, confidence. And when you go up there, like you said, is can you hang with the big boys? And you felt like you could. And I kind of felt like the Frank Sinatra thing, you know, where you feel like if you can't make it there, you can't make it anywhere, or where if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. When I came home, I felt like we couldn't do that, but years ago, we got back there. Things where I was like, well, okay, Frank, well, we made it for a minute, which was really, really nice. But yeah, it gave some confidence. We didn't have to answer your question.
Let's talk a little bit about what draws people into taking improv comedy classes. So there seems to be a real community of improvisers and sketch comedians and writers. And the people in these groups really seem to sync up well together and form like amazingly strong bonds, much more than like the average team or coworker experience. What do you think draws people into improv comedy? Like, who are they? What do they want from it?
This is perfect that you asked this today because, again, I just started classes last night that we do every 7 weeks or 8 weeks, whatever it is. And I ask them that question. That's the first thing I do after I tell them all this stuff is going to be is I ask the question, what made you take what's a passion of yours and what makes you take improv are the two questions I ask. And you get all gambits of answers on that, but I think the biggest answers that we laughed about last night, there are always 3 or 4 that are going through a big life change, breakup, change of job, something's not going right in their social life to where they're like, I'm going to try this thing that scared the hell out of me, so I'm going to go try it. That's been the biggest thing I've seen is where they come in and where life changes happen or that there's a challenge in their life that they want to try. But what's so lovely about it is when they come in is the make your partner look good thing is once you think about that is your golden rule every time to where what does it do? It produces friendships. It produces friendships, and plus you're producing friendships to where your goal is to go make people laugh, and you're gonna fail. Like that, it's not if you're gonna fail, it's when you're gonna fail and how you handle that together. And there's something we always joke around. It's like that. It's almost like how do you not become really good friends with somebody that when you watch them on their worst day, you know, and you see them go through. That's really my answer on that.
Yeah, and then I think the classes almost become a boot camp of sorts. Like for some reason, people really kind of connect with whoever their one-on-one class is. Some people go through the entire program, other people drop out, or they have to take some time off and then they come back to it. But we've done a really good job of creating a community. So you'll have classes where you'll have a 19-year-old kid and a 63-year-old grandmother in the same class, laughing at the same things, sharing their different life experiences, and just connecting with laughter and knowing that we're all in this together. That's the cool thing about improv is when you're doing an improv show, if you're doing it well, the audience can't tell who the star of the show is. Like you're only as good as your worst player. So we're either all going to succeed or we're all going to fail. And the cool thing about being in a group is when you all succeed, it's great. Then you go out and celebrate together. When you all fail, you also go out and commiserate about how horrible of a show you just had. As opposed when you're a stand-up comedian, when you have a horrible show, then you're driving home by yourself in your car that night with no one else to talk to. It becomes like a very lonely kind of existence. But even on your worst nights when you're in an improv group, you still have comrades around you to kind of lift you up.
Is it possible to practice improv alone by yourself without being on stage or in a group? That's a yes or no question.
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
Okay. One of the rules to improv is don't think, which is to say just kind of do or kind of say the first thing that comes into your head. Now, as someone who does that week after week and year after year, is that difficult to turn that off in your personal life, like not going with your first instinct all the time? Do you tend to overthink? Does that make sense?
No, I don't. I'm not a big overthinker. I think I'm pretty good with letting go. I have a temper, to answer your question. I get in trouble for not thinking enough.
Yeah, I would say that there's never been an instance where I've ever thought of Brad as overthinking anything.
So I attended a recent show, made some notes that I'd like to run through with you if possible. So the night I was there were about 7 to 8 cast members on stage. 2 cast members would be acting, and the remaining 6 actors would be hanging back in the background waiting to tag in. My question is, when you are on the back line against the wall, what are you thinking?
You're not. You're listening like a thief. One thing you could do is a mental note would be just like we talked earlier. Okay, that guy is gets angry and or gets loud in quiet situations. Where do I want to put him? That's about it. But we really rather you not think at all.
Sean?
Yeah, and I would say we shouldn't be thinking on the back line. I would say that is one of the hardest things to teach. Like I just taught a 301 class. They just graduated, and you can still see they're having that problem. And it's something that the more time they spend on stage, the more comfortable. But sometimes you can literally see them on the back line where they're not paying attention what's going on in front of them. The wheels are turning.
Sure.
Like, what am I going to do when it's my turn to step out?
There's a spontaneity that comes from this kind of performance that is very different from a conventional movie or show or even a Broadway production because the things are being said for the very first time. It's a very different experience. And as I was watching, I got very addicted to not knowing what could happen next. I think that almost more than anything was what kept me in the building for the late show because I didn't know what was going to happen next. I got very addicted to that feeling. Something I didn't expect, really.
I love you said that. I still think that's why I do it. Yeah, you don't know what's going to happen, and it's great.
So the stage is set up very, very minimally. There's lighting, the stage, and 3 or 4 fold-up chairs. And I want to talk about the chairs if I can. How many types of chairs did you go through before you landed on the big white plastic ones?
We still hate those, but we've gone through more than you can imagine. They break all the time. Somebody stands on them, they break them, especially me. They throw them if you get physical with them. That's hilarious. You asked that question. Tons.
Yeah, before that, it was just simple black folding metal chairs, and we went through a ton of those. Yeah,
like the professional wrestling kind of chairs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we kind of treated them like professional wrestlers. So it was like every couple months we'd have to go to Target to buy more black folding chairs because we just damaged them so much. So our investors got sick of it, so they're the ones who bought us the big, thick white chairs, which again, we're traditionalists. We like the metal chairs, but these have been extremely durable.
Mm-hmm. I've got a couple more questions. The Pushers are 14 years old. Is what interests you now different from what interested you in the beginning?
100%. Yeah. We've had some of our dreams come true that we've been dreaming about for 10 years. We have a project called the 666 Project that is really been one of my favorite things there is. Matter of fact, that's where we're going right after this that we have to leave for is we've been planning that for 10 years. So
6 writers.
Yeah, it's 6 writers, 6 actors, 6 directors, and 6 nights. Okay. Yeah, so it should be 4 6s, but we just kept it to make it evil for the macabre thing. But yeah, our interests have changed. Back then, I think it was all sketch and improv. We've gotten a little more serious. I think we've changed, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say now the majority of things that we do aren't for ourselves. Before the theater came along, it was always, all right, what's the next thing for the Pushers? When's their next show? Now it's become less, I guess some people don't see it this way, but from our perspective, it's become less about Brad and Sean and more about the community, yeah.
This is my final question, Brad, it's for you. Brad, you can claim something that few people can claim, and that is that you have been able to make a living in comedy. The writing, the teaching, the acting, you've made comedy your full-time job. When you stop and think about that, what do you think about? How does that make you feel?
I think about how many times I've missed. And then you think about the 4 or 5 times that you hit that really changed the whole game. Like speaking about us going back in the day, just how many times you've missed. And you're like, what am I doing? From stand-up comedy to commercial work to all the stupid thing. I mean, I was a T-bone steak on the side of a bus once, you know. And you look at all the ridiculousness of it is like, I'm proud of it. I'm happy. And I've lived a life that's less ordinary. Yeah, I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, I would say just for people, he was a T-bone steak in a lottery commercial. It's not that he just walks around town dressed as a T-bone steak. I'm going to say something nice about Brad, is that I am extremely proud of where he is now. Back when I didn't like Brad, when we first started the Pushers, he worked at Barnes & Noble, and the highlight of his day would just be carrying a big stack of books and do a pratfall in the middle of Barnes & Noble just because. And then he would pick up the books and then walk 5 more feet and then do another pratfall. That's how he spent his days. Now, you know, he's teaching workshops to businesses. NATO is one of our contracts. You've done really well, my friend.
That means a lot.
I would say we've made a lot of dumb mistakes in our past, but I don't think I would change any of the dumb mistakes that we've had, because every failure we've had is something that we've built upon and has gotten us to this point now.
This is going to sound a little cheesy, but it came to me after when I was listening to him talk, to watch these people that do come in from the wreck relationships or from the change of their life, and watch them to where we've facilitated it, where they can go and have fun and giggle, maybe up there now with the buzzes I used to get from making audiences laugh. I mean, I can tell you right now, I have been teary-eyed when you watch somebody. We had a very dear friend that had the end-of-life cancer that came and took this, and we named the room, you may have seen it at the theater, called the Julia Room, to get the relationships I've had, the lovely relationships out of being dipshits, has been wonderful. There's my real answer, is that, yeah, I've made a living off it, but I've also I think he and I have really, we switched in 2011. 2011, we became less about us and more about other people, and I think that may have helped me keep a living, believe it or not. Yeah.
Brad McMurran, Sean Devereux, I love your theater. I love your comedy. Thanks so much for coming on the show. It means a lot to me.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for this show. This has been some of the coolest questions we've ever been asked.
Yeah, thank you.
This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you've been listening to the Q&A with A.P.C. To hear archived episodes, visit qaapc.com. For exclusive content, including upcoming shows, behind-the-scenes pictures, and more, follow the show on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at QAAPC. The executive producer of the Q&A with A.P.C. is Ben Riley. The music was arranged by Soup.